Good morning, Sunday school class. This is the second Sunday morning. This is Brother McCartney, your Sunday school teacher, speaking to the mixed group where Sister Marge Hartswick is our Sunday school teacher. Sister Marge likes to start her classes with music, so I thought I would follow in that pattern with respect to Pastor Black, Sister Delois McCartney, Sister Hicks, Sister Wright, and to each of you on this beautiful day. Ooh-wee, another blessing.
Here's what I said. Thank you, Lord, for the blood you shed. You put a roof up over my head. Thank you, Lord, for another day. All these blessings you sent my way. You see, I could have been dead in some lonesome grave, but you told, oh death, you told it to get back and behave.
Another blessing.
Another blessing. Another blessing. Another blessing. Another blessing. Another blessing. Oh, another blessing. Lee Williams sang, I've never seen.
Again, Sunday school class, we have an interesting lesson today. It's going to take me more than 15 minutes to do it, so I'm just going to, again, summarize, and when my 15 minutes is up, then you can continue your own Bible study. But it's important that you understand some basic things as we get ready to do that today. Our lessons, it comes from Judges chapter 6, and I wanted to allow my Bible to read part of that for you today. Chapter 6, verse 11 through chapter 7, verse 2. And for me, I started with verse 1 because it's important that we understand what's going on in this lesson today. So as part of my summary, I want to make sure that I highlight for you a couple of things that I think is important for you to do is that you need to make sure you understand who these judges were and why they were. Why did God have to bring them into being, and to what did they needed to do in order for God to serve and to fulfill the needs of his people. And the second thing I want to make sure that we try to touch on is to understand what does it mean, the call of Gideon, which is our subject. So what happened to Gideon? What does it mean for him to be called, and what was his choice task to do? And finally, next, then, who was this Gideon? I mean, was he some monarch? Was he some special person? Or was he just like you and I? And then finally, if we have time and the 15 minutes is not up, we'll talk a little bit about, there was two miracles. There was the angel that came in and made sure that Gideon knew that he was being called by God. And then there was the miracle of the fleece. So we will touch base on one of the two of those depending on the time. So I'm going to let the Bible be read for you today.
Chapter 6, Gideon. Once again the people of Israel sinned against the Lord, so he let the people of Midian rule them for 7 years. The Midianites were stronger than Israel, and the people of Israel hid from them in caves and other safe places in the hills. Whenever the Israelites would plant their crops, the Midianites would come with the Amalekites and the desert tribes and attack them. They would camp on the land and destroy the crops as far south as the area around Gaza. They would take all the sheep, cattle, and donkeys and leave nothing for the Israelites to live on. They would come with their livestock and tents as thick as locusts. They and their camels were too many to count. They came and devastated the land, and Israel was helpless against them. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help against the Midianites, and he sent them a prophet who brought them this message from the Lord, the God of Israel. I brought you out of slavery in Egypt. I rescued you from the Egyptians and from the people who fought you here in this land. I drove them out as you advanced, and I gave you their land. I told you that I am the Lord your God, and that you should not worship the gods of the Amorites, whose land you are now living in. But you have not listened to me. Then the Lord's angel came to the village of Ophrah and sat under the oak tree that belonged to Joash, a man of the clan of Abiezer. His son Gideon was threshing some wheat secretly in a winepress, so that the Midianites would not see him. The Lord's angel appeared to him there and said, "The Lord is with you, brave and mighty man." Gideon said to him, "If I may ask, sir, why has all this happened to us if the Lord is with us? What happened to all the wonderful things that our fathers told us the Lord used to do? How he brought them out of Egypt? The Lord has abandoned us and left us to the mercy of the Midianites." Then the Lord ordered him, "Go with all your great strength and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I myself am sending you." Gideon replied, "But Lord, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least important member of my family." The Lord answered, "You can do it because I will help you. You will crush the Midianites as easily as if they were only one man." Gideon replied, "If you are pleased with me, give me some proof that you are really the Lord. Please do not leave until I bring you an offering of food." He said, "I will stay until you come back." So Gideon went into his house and cooked a young goat and used a bushel of flour to make bread without any yeast. He put
Let's pause a minute there on that reading, just so that I can highlight a couple of things that we've covered there as we started from the sixth, beginning first verse 1 in the 6th chapter. Now we want to make sure we understand that the prophet was not Gideon. And Gideon is the servant that God is calling, and now in the next few verses, the angel is going to demonstrate to Gideon that he was a representative of God. And after that representation is proven to Gideon, Gideon is going to respond to that call by actually challenging God again and says, I need some more proof. And that happens to us. So what we find here in this lesson is the fact that this cycle of rebuking God and then God putting them in periods of punishment, whether by the Midianites or whoever, and then the people calling out to God as they did in Egypt, and God hearing their cry and sending Moses in that case, and in this case, sending Gideon for this next adventure. And we have all the prophets, not the prophets, all of the judges that we read about in the book of Judges, which include Samuel, it included Eli, Samson, Deborah, Ehud, who Sister Morris talked about last Sunday. God will send us what we need when we need it if we're willing to respond. So now we're going to pay attention to what is a call. So God now has a need. The people have cried out to it. The angel has come and is now in the process of speaking to Gideon. And once God speaks to Gideon, Gideon is going to need to not only hear the word of the Lord again, as I talked about in those other letters, again, that we hear these words, we hear these messages Sunday after Sunday, but how we're going to respond to our call. So now we're still continuing. We're still around the 19th verse in the book of the 6th chapter of Judges, and we're going to see what the angel does with Gideon.
Put the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot, brought them to the Lord's angel under the oak tree, and gave them to him. The angel told him, "Put the meat and the bread on this rock, and pour the broth over them." Gideon did so. Then the Lord's angel reached out and touched the meat and the bread with the end of the stick he was holding. Fire came out of the rock and burned up the meat and the bread. Then the angel disappeared. Gideon then realized that it was the Lord's angel he had seen, and he said in terror, "Sovereign Lord, I have seen your angel face to face." But the Lord told him, "Peace, don't be afraid. You will not die." Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and named it, "The Lord is Peace." It is still standing at Ophrah, which belongs to the clan of Abiezer. That night the Lord told Gideon, "Take your father's bull and another bull 7 years old. Tear down your father's altar to Baal, and cut down the symbol of the goddess Asherah, which is beside it. Build a well-constructed altar to the Lord your God on top of this mound. Then take the second bull and burn it whole as an offering, using for firewood the symbol of Asherah you have cut down." So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did what the Lord had told him. He was too afraid of his family and the people in town to do it by day, so he did it at night. When the people in town got up early the next morning, they found that the altar to Baal and the symbol of Asherah had been cut down, and that the second bull had been burned on the altar that had been built there. They asked each other, "Who did this?" They investigated and found out that Gideon, son of Joash, had done it. Then they said to Joash, "Bring your son out here, so that we can kill him. He tore down the altar to Baal and cut down the symbol of Asherah beside it." But Joash said to all those who confronted him, "Are you arguing for Baal? Are you defending him? Anyone who argues for him will be killed before morning. If Baal is a god, let him defend himself. It is his altar that was torn down." From then on, Gideon was known as Jerubbaal, because Joash said, "Let Baal defend himself. It is his altar that was torn down." Then all the Midianites, the Amalekites, and the desert tribes assembled, crossed the Jordan River, and camped in Jezreel Valley. The Spirit of the Lord took control of Gideon, and he blew a trumpet to call the men of the clan of Abiezer to follow him. He sent messengers throughout the territory of both parts of Manasseh to call them to follow him. He sent messengers to the tribes of Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they also came to join him.
Now, again, so much in this lesson. I'm just trying to reach the high point. So now Gideon has responded to the angel. The angel has demonstrated to him that the angel was supernatural, spiritual. He had come from God. And now Gideon is doing what I'm sharing that many of us have to do. We now must respond to the call. And in my next 2.5 to 3 minutes, I just want to share with you what Gideon did, and let the Bible read it for you so you can hear it for yourself, because Gideon still was not quite ready. So he's going to challenge God one more time, and he's going to do that by asking God to do something with what sometimes is described as the miracle of the fleece. So as we probably going to run out of time, but understanding that these judges were there to do great work in response to the call of the Lord. We must respond when the Lord calls us. And Gideon is now, as we're going to find in next Sunday's lesson, going to take 32,000, trim them down to 300, and do a miracle for the children of Israel. So now I'm going to end this with the last few readings, and hopefully you will have gotten some.
Then Gideon said to God, "You say that you have decided to use me to rescue Israel. Well, I am putting some wool in the ground where we thresh the wheat. If in the morning there is dew only on the wool, but not on the ground, then I will know that you are going to use me to rescue Israel." That is exactly what happened. When Gideon got up early the next morning, he squeezed the wool and wrung enough dew out of it to fill a bowl with water. Then Gideon said to God, "Don't be angry with me. Let me speak just once more. Please let me make one more test with the wool. This time let the wool be dry and the ground be wet." That night God did that very thing. The next morning the wool was dry, but the ground was wet with dew. Chapter 7. Gideon defeats the Midianites. One day Gideon and all his men got up early and camped beside Harod Spring. The Midianite camp was in the valley to the north of them by Marah Hill. The Lord said to Gideon, "The men you have are too many for me to give them victory over the Midianites. They might think that they had won by themselves, and so give me no credit. Announce to the people, anyone who is afraid should go back home, and we will stay here at Mount Gilead." So 22,000 went back, but 10,000 stayed.
And this is where we'll take up for next Sunday that Gideon took 32,000 people assembled under his request to respond to the call of the God, and they were going to follow him. But God told Gideon that this was too many, because God should get the credit for what we do, and he doesn't need an army. And so he's going to reduce that army of 32,000 down to 300, and then he's going to give them the victory without them raising a sword. Hopefully that you understand now that today's lesson was about the call of Gideon, and the call for each of you and I. How do we respond to that call? How do we know that we were called by the Lord? Don't get confused by listening to the call of the world or the call of the wild or whatever. We want to respond to what God has in store. And I believe that God has a purpose for every one of us. We all have a call. Maybe to be the janitor, could be to be the pastor, could just be the bus driver. Respond to God's call to you as Gideon responded to God's call for him. I'm at 16 minutes. That's a minute longer than I wanted to. You guys have a blessed day, and make sure you listen to Reverend Black's sermon, a message for the day. And those of us who are giving, go to the donate page and give on the donate page. If you're giving through tithes and offering to an envelope, make sure you put it in the mailbox. And we'll thank you so very much. Have a great day. South Phoenix Baptist Church.